Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investment, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives.
This is the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Fergus Hodgson, your host, and so excited to be back in 2021. And we are lucky to have the founder of the China and MENA project today. Her name is Zineb Riboua. She's also a graduate student in public policy at Georgetown University. This is her first time on the show. Zineb, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And this lady came to my attention because she wrote an important article, How COVID-19 Exposed China's Foreign Policy Goals. And especially with the transition of power in the United States, China just is always in the news. And she is of Moroccan by birth, and she can give us some thoughts on China beyond just the United States. So what motivated you to both start this organization and then write, and this is on just medium.com, but then write this article on the topic?
Yeah, sure. I last year it was my gap year, and I started doing an internship at a think tank in Washington, D.C., where I mainly focused on the Middle East. And then I got onto a project where the goal was to see China's involvement there and Chinese and U.S. competition. And after that, I found out that there isn't enough bibliographies or enough data or on there's not enough comprehension on how much China has a sphere of influence in North Africa and in the Middle East. I think that for a long time, people thought that China was mainly trying to influence some strategic point in the Horn of Africa or in Africa or in Asia. But to think about China being involved in the Middle East with so much investments and with so much strategic planning, that was something I think that a lot of scholars didn't think of at first. Now there's many things evolved, and we see that there's a rise of research, and that's what motivated me to create that, so that I can gather all the research and have scholars who work on that being on one project.
So you've started the China and MENA project, and your article does not hold back, which is what I appreciate, people speaking frankly. So let me just quote a little bit here. The coronavirus pandemic is, however, more than a sanitary crisis, since it unveiled the hidden Sino-American tensions that were already exacerbated by the trade war in 2019. It revealed China's real motives, goals, lawfare practices, and information war. So these not only to challenge, but to eradicate U.S. global leadership. And do you believe this is working? And do you want to defend your statement that the coronavirus revealed it, whereas we were maybe asleep at the switch before?
Yeah. So actually, China works on what is called the three warfares, which is a kind of hybrid warfare, kind of Russia style, where they use psychological warfare, legal warfare, and public opinion warfare. And the idea is to combine the three so that they can have influence without actually using any force or military force. And this is the Sun Tzu doctrine, so that you can go smoothly. You can have so much influence and kind of manipulate how things are going, so that they can go into your favor. That's actually in the books of Chinese strategic military doctrine. And they have been kind of deceptive in their real goals, which means that at first they were saying, okay, all we want is development, all we want is growth, But actually, what they really wanted was to challenge the United States, which is actually it's not a political statement. It's a statement. It just what they have been doing, because they cannot, for example, have access to strategic ports without challenging the United States, and they need to do that. So that's how I found the pandemic very interesting, in a way that China trying to weaponize narratives so that they do not talk about Wuhan, and they have attacked so many journalists and nurses and doctors who try to raise any questions. So that's why I found that the pandemic was very much revealing of China's true motives.
Hasn't this just backfired for them, though? Hasn't this just meant that their actions to try to control the narrative exactly has just revealed their more dictatorial or authoritarian ways?
Well, certainly. I mean, they have always operated that way, but it seems that for many countries, it was blurry, especially for Europe, because they have been dealing with China for so long. Their supply chains rely on China, so they thought that that it was not that bad. But countries like Italy and Spain, they have had many concerns about, especially during the pandemic, about China. So it's like the United States was kind of always aware of what China was doing, but it's other countries. It means United States friends, and because they're allies, so that whenever something happens, they need to be aware of it too. So that's how I think it downplayed.
Sure. So basically, you're just saying that people more on the periphery or allies are now more aware of the China threat. And when you see this confrontation rising, are there particular elements that are concerning about the changing of the guard, or the loss of US leadership? Why is that a problem to you?
So the problem is mainly democratic values and Western values, because it's really about that. It's really about having the standard of surveillance states, and having eradication camps that are normalized in China, and all this kind of behavior that is anti-US and anti anything the United States has fought against, the Soviet Union, for example, and so it is very much of an ideological clash, and so I do think that having China leadership worldwide can be very threatening for liberty and for freedom of speech and for basic human rights. So this is why I think that it is alarming.
Why, I mean, aside from your own lineage, why did you choose to focus on the Middle East and North Africa as a particular region for Chinese engagement?
So because at first, because I found that there was not enough engagement in that area, and not enough journalists, maybe from the Middle East, can be very much critical about China. And so offering this platform so that they can discuss China's involvement in a very kind of diplomatic, neutral, and research-oriented way is a step forward, so that real questions can be treated. And second of all, because just because I'm very familiar with the area, and I see China exploring some kind of their own political methods. For example, they kind of start deals or start strategic cooperations with countries without taking into consideration the level at which they pay the debt back, or if there are authoritarian regimes, and so they kind of enable them. And I think that being very familiar with these countries and aiming for the better for the region, I do think that raising the Chinese question is very important.
So you see U.S. involvement in that part of the world as more benign than Chinese. That's one of your key conclusions or key assumptions.
Yes, I think that the United States is very much involved also. I mean, you've just seen the normalizations that China brokered, that the United States brokered with Israel and other countries. So the United States is very much a huge force. But again, there are certain areas that are very vital for the United States, which they're related not just to trade or commerce, but also fighting against terrorism. And so, if you have China enabling countries that are sponsor terrorism, it's very dangerous. I think that each country for now is trying to make the right decisions in a pragmatic way, but having U.S. leadership on issues on like human rights is very important, because in the re-education camps, it's Muslims that are there, and a lot of Muslim countries, they cannot speak about it, mainly because they have been controlled economically by China.
Right. Okay. And what conclusions do you have in terms of policy then for the United States? Let's say you're working in the US State Department and you realize there's this threat, China's expanding, China uses all this, not just military force, but lots of economic, and I think you said there are 3 types of informational tools at their disposal. How does one actually counteract that? And we observe China is expanding its reach all across the world, not just in the Middle East and North Africa. And it's become increasingly caustic, you might say, or increasingly abrasive. And I know the Canada situation where Chinese basically have just taken hostage a few Canadians as a threat or as some sort of bargaining chip. And so we observe this, but then we wonder, what do we actually do about it? And in the case of the Canadians, they're afraid to give up their trade relationship with China. They're really trying to be careful about it. And my question is just, okay, now we observe this problem and we know that the Chinese, let's say, are not exactly human rights defenders, but we don't want to, let's say, just waste all this money abroad, or we don't want to get into a military conflict. How does one actually respond in an astute or thoughtful manner?
Yeah, so I do think that the first thing that need to be dealt with is the domestic politics, because yeah, you found that my article was very much controversial, and it's been very hard to talk about China. And I do think that just to have this impression is very actually bad for a democratic debate about China's involvement, not just abroad for foreign policy concerns, but in the country. Because when you take decisions, you also want to talk about all the actors that are involved, and some actors, they are influenced by lobbies or by other companies that are state-owned by the Chinese government, the CCP. And so, first of all, having these discussions is very important, and dealing with cutting the ties with anything that might put into danger this exact freedom. And then the second thing will be to hold China accountable, especially during this pandemic, because they have been acting in a way that I would consider very aggressive. For example, not sharing any information. I think I've seen it yesterday. the World Health Organization still says that China doesn't allow any doctors to go there or researchers to investigate the origin of the virus. And so holding China accountable on every possible area is very important, because they cannot actually, even if they want to get bigger, they would need to deal with other international actors, because they will evolve in an international community that is very much that very much share the same values about democracy, human rights, etc. And so they cannot get away with it easily, and they should not, because just for the safety of the world and for having a peaceful transition in case they get bigger and more powerful.
That is true regarding the intimidation or the fear that people have. And I'll admit that even here in Houston, that there are Chinese students that will seek to confront you if you speak negatively about the regime. So do you feel that specter over you of repercussions or of vengeance from the regime towards someone like you who is taking a stand?
I've learned that it's very important to speak the truth, whatever are the consequences. I I think that it's very important also to develop my own critical thinking, and by writing articles and by talking to scholars, it's the only way for me actually to know more about China. Maybe because maybe I'm wrong. We have always we always, whenever try to think about something, try to gather information, but sometimes these information are not accurate. And so for me, it's kind of my way of learning, and I'm not really afraid if if I get any sentence from the CCP. But actually, the point you raised about Chinese citizens, it is very important, because we should not mix things between the Chinese people and the CCP. I think it reminds me of the Pearl Harbor attack, and right after, President Roosevelt took all the Japanese Americans and they took them to an internment camps, and because they were seen as spies. And this is kind of like that policy. The right policy is to have general discussions, and to not be silenced, because it's actually against what we are standing for.
Yeah, and there's actually a lady who is an exile of China, Lily Tang, who even ran for the Libertarian Party in Colorado, I think as a Senate candidate or something like that, who is very outspoken. And of course, we should be smart about that, or prudent, and say that a government, which is a dictatorial government, is not reflective of the people. And so what about the critique that China has really, the CCP, they have really overextended themselves and actually will collapse economically? Do you believe any of that?
Well, yes, in the sense that it's not sustainable. It's not a sustainable regime. When you check the inequalities, regional inequalities in China, they are very concerning and alarming. And usually, a communist regime should not have inequality. What they say is,
Yeah, and the rhetoric does not advocate inequality. Sure, yeah.
It's kind of because when you suppress so much rights, people expect to have a certain living standards and living conditions, and when they see that there is so much inequality, that's how you have more dissidents. And there's this first factor of inequality, intense inequality, and then you also have just the suppression of basic rights. everything in China right now is surveyed. You cannot talk about anything politically or like so lightly as we can do. Um, and it's not sustainable. At some point, people will want their rights back, and also China was a dynasty, and historically they have been able to be kind of a great dynasty without suppressing these rights, because they were so proud of their culture and heritage. After the Cultural Revolution, they were kind of alienated with all the communist propaganda. And so, from what I've heard and what I've seen, is that a lot of Chinese people, they are kind of nostalgic of, China as a dynasty that was very much great, either in Eurasia, and they see the Communist Party as a party that do not represent them. Um, and so yeah, when you have this kind of combination, it's a perfect recipe for saying that, yeah, probably there will be a collapse in a few years, or maybe in a century, who knows, but it's not sustainable at all.
Right. And more recently, I've seen one of your other articles says the banning of TikTok should not be controversial. So aside from just discussion, you do want some more meaty policies. So do you want to explain why there should be a ban on TikTok?
Yeah, so concerning TikTok, just because it's an application, it's not the part that bothers me. It's really an application that we have no control of. The data that is used, we don't know where it goes. And if a country wants to ban it, just like China bans Facebook and other applications, they should be allowed to. I think that there's a kind of double standard there.
So
That's why
you're saying that the Chinese will block Western ideas from getting into their own country. Meanwhile, they will infiltrate the United States with their own less savory ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it's kind of tricky, because you want to protect the national security. You want also to protect your population, because the problem with TikTok is that a lot of children and a lot of teenagers use it, and they can find inappropriate content on this application anytime, and it's very dangerous. And so, just the child trafficking part, the surveillance part, and not knowing how the data is used is very problematic.
Yeah, it is a tension that I've felt more and more over the years between the laissez-faire approach, which I love, of the United States, and also protecting that from a sinister or hostile force. There is a tension there. Now, one of my dear friends, David Landau, just published an article with the Epoch Times about why Trump should side with Taiwan. Do you personally take a strong position as to whether that's a worthwhile endeavor?
And you would think that it's not just Trump. I think all the presidents kind of sided with Taiwan, because you don't want any aggression in China, in Asia. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because you will need to go there, and from the wargaming I've seen, for example, the military wargaming, it will be very, very difficult to protect Taiwan. And so I think that I don't have actually a definite answer to that. But of course, protecting Taiwan more than and doing more, because you've seen how the West dealt with Hong Kong. I think they should, of course, do something.
Or did not deal with, just let it happen, basically. Just let Hong Kong go under Chinese rule or CCP rule.
Yeah, which is very much unfortunate. And so you want to protect Taiwan, but at the same time, have a clear discussion with China so that China do not get more radical or aggressive, because you also have the North Korea problem. And if something happens with North Korea, you will need China to discuss, and you need China on the table. And so, it's like a chess game, and so I unfortunately don't have a different answer about how to go with Taiwan. But my basic assumption is that protecting Taiwan is very important to protect the region in general, so that you don't have a Russia Crimea scenario.
Right. It seems likely in the near future. So, yeah, we've been speaking with Zineb Riboua, and I hope I have not butchered that name. She's a graduate student at Georgetown University in public policy. And her article is How COVID-19 Exposed China's Foreign Policy Goals. You can follow her on Twitter. We'll have that on the show notes, which are at goldnewsletter.com/podcast. She also has a Medium account where she blogs, and there's a lot of spicy material there. Her project is the China and MENA project, and I assume you're still constructing that website or platform. Do you want to explain what's going on with that?
Yes, so we're still working on it, but we will starting from this month, maybe late January, to have panelists, and to have people who can actually talk about China's involvement and China's diplomacy. And so, stay tuned and follow the page no more.
Zineb, thanks for your honesty and courage in speaking about this issue.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It has been a pleasure.